Welcome back to the Disrupt Education Podcast. We are coming from behind the scenes. Alli Privet, Peter Hostrasser. Alli, what is happening today? It's a beautiful day outside today.
It is. And since we're just kind of rolling into podcasting, people don't, let's give our listeners a little behind the scenes. Why not? I always
Sure.
like that stuff whenever I'm listening to a good podcast. I'm like, ooh, they're talking about stuff that they don't always talk about. But if you're not in the podcasting world, and this is like behind the scenes with education too.
Yeah.
Okay. So like it's a production. Um, Peter does a lot of editing and, putting what you guys see, this is the final product together. And with his background in broadcast
Yeah.
journalism, or
Yep.
is it? Yep.
Yep. That's it.
And whatnot. And, sometimes we schedule things and they don't always go to plan, but the show must go on. And that is true in show business, in teaching, in all of that. So we had an original, whenever this comes out, we had an original plan with a different guest, which will probably still happen,
Mm-hmm.
but we had to adjust. Sometimes you double book yourselves. And that is some of the behind the scenes podcasting stuff that we get to do. We don't always showcase it because
No.
it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter, but it's a valuable lesson in like being able to. We could have been like, oh, today is a failure. Our guest or whatnot couldn't make it, and it's a waste of time, and it or we could just adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And we're recording this one earlier, and that's kind of the fun behind the scenes stuff that people don't
Yeah.
always get to know.
Yeah, I think that's important actually because it isn't perfect. Like, right? Like things change. You have to be flexible. You have to, like you said, you just have to pivot and try to, okay, so I used to get like really angry at this, but I think it might become because of teacher training. It's so rigid, right? And I know we're going to get into Ken's conversation and CTE and stuff, but kind of leading into that, you do have to like really adjust. But even in as a learner, you have to adjust. It's just different things, no big deal, but like you have to, try to figure out, okay, so now what can I do? And I think that we're so excited right now because we're talking with amazing people. We're having great conversations, a lot of people with their skin in the game, especially in the education world, who are just trying to make changes. And pretty much a lot of our guests, if not all of them, have an emotion and a why behind it. And I love that. And so, and I think Ken really had that. Like, we honestly, we will definitely have him back on. But we could have gone 4 hours into that. We could have Joe Rogan that whole thing.
Oh my gosh.
There was so much. But yeah, where do you want to start with Ken, Alli?
I think it's kind of this something that I can just tell he does because of how he talks about the way he teaches, is that there is no time wasted in whatever he does, and that he sees learning happening in every moment. Like I love the example he gave at the end of parking lot geometry, parking lot lessons,
Yeah.
and this idea that's like, understanding how to measure or understanding how to do stuff and making it really hands-on. He gave such beautiful practical idea there. And I think with you mentioning this idea that education system can be rigid and time based, and we have to check all these boxes and dot all these i's and cross all these t's, and the fluidity of learning, and taking, in my mind, like I was thinking of a bigger vision of a parking lot learning, is that it can just happen anywhere. And we almost box in learning too much.
Mm-hmm.
And Ken talks about this in his episode, it's so good about like, you can think of all of these reasons why kids shouldn't do this, or liability or red tape, whatever the reason, or you can just figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And the system that he's in, I mean, the fact that it's like 9 schools getting bussed in, it's a huge system and it's working. And kids are getting these opportunities to, in high school, go from having never done anything potentially technical to getting hired, paid during high school, and then getting a job immediately following. I mean, talk about learning model that would be is very enticing. I'm sure, like, it sounded like he has now, or did, I don't think he's still at that program, but it sounds like the program is now more even competition based. Like, you have to show up and show out if you're even going to get these prized kind of paid opportunities.
Yeah.
That's motivating for kids. Have
That's
something to work towards.
reality, right? I mean, I think, and this kind of goes into the grade inflation thing. And I don't want to go all the way down that rabbit hole, but I think grade inflation is taking that carrot away. I think that it's not really much. I see it all the time. Unfortunately, the way, and this is kind of uncovering some things behind education, but when a certain grade is given, which is extremely subjective, I mean, in a lot of ways, not all the time. If they're not having to perform something, and just regurgitate, or kind of create something with a rubric, I can see it differently than you. The carrot gets basically a little bit rotten out front. You know what I'm saying? So what I really like about Ken and his approach to things is just attaching the reality. And really, we in our previous conversation, when he said I jump up on desk, exactly that day I actually did jump up on a desk when we were having our conversation in the spring, and I started laughing. He's like, what? It's like, I was like, we both actually, I just did that today, and I'll do that to get kids to look up, or to when something important is, or whatever. Obviously school insurance probably doesn't like that, but whatever, right? Like, you have to do those things. And another thing, I love that you brought up the parking lot lessons. I have a kid, and this is a website design course. And we were basically done with the part of the lessons that we had to do, and we were working on projects, and he was creating a website for his car detailing business. And he does it, he's very into cars. And so I've got a few like scratches or whatever on the side of my car, and it's literally like 100 yards outside the classroom, and there's a door there. And so I was like, Saif, let's go outside, man. I want to see this, because you have expertise in the clay stuff and all this. There's crazy stuff these guys do now. It's not just waxing a car anymore, Alli. But so I took him out and I showed him, and he was like, "Really? You're taking me outside?" And I was like, "Yeah. I mean, yeah. I want your expertise, because I saw your website that you're creating, and obviously these things in those conversations." But I think, like, there are different ways and different levels that we can attach to kids' interest and creativity, and then kind of show them that you are empowered. You can do these things. You can screw up, right? I'm sure, Ken really didn't talk about it in this, but I know, I've talked to our even welding teacher. It's like, yeah, some of these welds are like, but you got to start somewhere, right? You can't just pick up a ball and make 10 free throws out of 10 when you first start. So, but I really like that there's this outcome of why, right? And I just don't, like, a diploma is not enough for kids these days. It just isn't. They want like something tangible. And that was something that I really appreciated about that conversation.
The idea of performance-based assessments in there and showing what you can do, the inability to fake it. And I know for myself, I hearing conversations with you, having conversations with friends and family, when you talk about memories from school, it typically is around things you made, things you built, things you put together, some kind of, it could be a portfolio. I remember making like a trebuchet in high school physics, or I still have this calendar from photography class, and it was like all these curated photos, and it was like put together in Photoshop, and all the editing, and then print the developing of the pictures, and all of those things, all of the components. It was a lot of hands-on pieces, and the end product had to do something. Like the trebuchet was like, how far can you sling this tennis ball across the football field? And like we all went out and like tested our little trebuchets, and some were not so little, some were like in the back of a pickup truck, and other ones were like mousetrap versions. But when you can't, you cannot have anything to show, and then the performance speaks for itself, or you have something physical and that is made. In a lot of industry these days, it does require a hands-on component, or understanding how those things are put together, what's literally like behind the scenes or behind the walls. Like, if you've never done construction and you just always been in these like nice curated finished locations, you don't necessarily have an appreciation for how those things were made or built or work. And there's a lot of power in understanding those things. The learning is unforgettable. And so to have more programs like that and these performance type models, I just think we started talking about this on Ken's episode, but they greatly benefit students at any age, right? Like and certainly educators in the system, because being able to do stuff with your hands and build and create, I can't even find an argument, and if you have one, please tell me, of where that would not be valuable.
Right.
And because it's bigger than a career. It's life skills that no matter, you never know when you're going to need to like rewire something in your home or where you live. And even if you rent, like the landlord may or may not know how to fix it. And it's like, if you realize like, oh, it's just this one thing, you can even identify the problem. Maybe it could get fixed sooner, or it's something that you could take care of. And I don't know, if you have no idea how it works, nothing works. Everything is just like this beautiful performance stage. It's like, feels like the blind leading the blind. It's what it is.
My daughter's in driver's ed right now, and she had to change a tire, right? Cool, right? Like, I don't remember, maybe I don't remember doing that in driver's ed. I learned because I worked at a car dealership too. So as you can see, like a lot of experiences, but you start to think about, okay, if I think part of it is, we need to ask our kids, what are they interested in more, and then actually give them the opportunities to do that practice, right? So I had also a kid who is wanting to be a dentist, right? And he's a freshman, very, very focused on it, right? So some people like just know what they want to do. Michael is a kid who really knows what he wants to do. And so as he was building his portfolio, he was talking about doing stuff. And that's why I brought it up with Ken, like the dexterity. Like this kid like said, I have to have the dexterity with my hands to do this. And I'm thinking, I don't even know how to spell dexterity. Like, and here's a kid, and it actually, when we were sharing those things out, those stories out in class, and it was a career planning class, which I love. A senior later on told me, I asked, what was your biggest memory in the class? And he was like, well, what Michael did with his portfolio, like he already has the understanding. And so I think, his mom worked in a dental office and things like that. So he has that exposure, but how can we give more students this exposure, whether they go into it or not? The other thing that I really like what Ken said is not everybody who went through that program actually went into the trades, right? They went into, he was talking about a young lady who, getting a degree and going into something else. What's interesting, though, that I really like about the tangible things, and I'm going to connect Amanda from Popello to what she said and what Ken did, and to see like that orchestra of something happening, right? So when Ken was describing the entire facility where some kids were coming in 5 minutes later, you may have 20 kids, you may have 2 kids or whatever, that flexibility, actually there are two things that come out of that from our previous conversations. The first one was a Ken, right? Like, so when I worked with electricians, when we were working on houses and in the foundry, we were working in steel foundries in Northwest Indiana. There was a lot of talk and collaboration. So the plumbers, the builders, the electricians, you had to work, and then you had a contractor. So there was a lot of flow, and not everything went by the construction thing. So I know, like, it's kind of unspoken with anybody in the trades, you have this ability to be flexible, right? And to work around or work with, because you can't put in an electrical recep when a wall's not there, right? So there's a lot of different things that occur there. And then taking it back to Amanda is trusting your teachers, trusting your educators to do what they know's best for the kids, even if it's not in a completely structured environment. And I know what Ken was describing there, as a 2-time national CTE award winner, that's what needed to happen. So kudos to Ken, but also for the organization for really, like, just trusting in him and saying, okay, these buses are going to come in different times, and if a kid misses, we're going to trust that you're going to set something up like online or whatever. It's not like we can't do this because not everybody's going to be there, which I feel like there are a lot of standardized education models out there that will shut it down because it's not unbelievably organized. So yeah, that's a big takeaway there. But
what he was describing to someone who lives in a very traditional linear public school model where everyone's there every day, minus field trips or absences because they're sick, something like that, sounds like craziness.
Yeah.
And then if you listen to what he said, he's like, some students he only saw twice a month.
Yeah.
And imagine, a classroom where you have students that you see, that would be like 8 times in a whole semester at most.
Some of them I
And
would like to see them only 8. No, I'm just teasing.
but versus there is this kind of graduation and flow that you're talking about, and circular type learning experiences. And I can speak to feeling like that kind of model would be impossible to somebody who's never seen it done.
Sure.
And like being early in your career and you only know what you only know. And so like part of the benefit of these types of conversations is just learning that like these models already exist, they're operational. There's, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you're not doing this alone. There are places that are executing on these types of ideas. And we've had many conversations with people over the past year who are building or have built or have improved and grown these types of models for students and learning. And so I think that's kind of important to highlight, is that if you've never been exposed to anything other than the traditional model, that's okay. Like, you're not alone in that, right? And there,
definitely.
and you don't know what you don't know, right? There is this. When I started teaching, I had no thoughts of breaking the mold or doing things differently. I remember being like, okay, well, my cooperating teacher as a student teacher does this, and so my first year teaching, like, I knew it worked for her, and so I'm gonna make it work for me. It didn't. Like I had to like kind of find my own teacher voice. And we've talked about this a little bit. You have
Yeah.
to find kind of your rhythm. But I think like on a bigger scale, students advocating for themselves and what they want, and parents advocating for it, they held a lot of power in the school system that they may not realize. Communities, voters,
Hmm.
school boards, like these. This is why we talk about like the power of a local community a lot on the
Hmm.
podcast. And then really these initiatives do happen in communities.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of power in that. And that, particularly if you aren't in a big system, I think you have even more power for change because things move faster. So I did think about that during Ken's discussion, is that, if you haven't talked to someone like Ken, reach out to him.
Hmm.
And or Nate Clayberg comes to mind as another innovator. And then to your point about Propello's work, I was thinking about this. Like we do then need systems and software that can be more flexible.
Yeah.
And so Propello, and there are other software companies and ed tech and stuff that can support this type of work to kind of get it off the ground. And in a flexible learning model, you're going to need flexible software, flexible grading, flexible standards. You're going to need just basically a lot more flexibility in the whole system. So I we you get indoctrinated into this rigid system,
Hmm.
but I think at some point you want to tear down the walls.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you're speaking that out, and that's so true. Yeah, you should connect with Ken, listeners. It's interesting. The one thing that really hasn't become that flexible is the schedule of a day, like, and especially in secondary. And I think that's the one I just keep banging my head against the wall. I'm like, because then it starts to impede the way that students learn, right? It works for some, and I don't want to discount that. I mean, studies have shown 20 to 30% of students it's a great system for them. However, I think, like, I have an internship. I have a couple of internship classes next year. um I actually, not at the current school that I'm at, a couple of schools ago, I broke a ginormous rule because the students were coming in. It was a 0 hour, so it was before school, and we were meeting, and they had internship courses, right? So they would come in, and I had them come in twice a week. I was like, you guys don't have to be here every day. And I know that was a ginormous rule, but I was like, I will be here every day if you guys need to get here. And actually, no lie, some kids would come most days and just sit down, maybe do some other homework or just talk or whatever. But what's interesting is, even in the internship classes that we have now that are built into the school day, our kids get to leave early. And, you know, do they need to be there every day? No. So we use that time, though, to talk, right? It's not like assign. I think there's this humanistic approach of talking with students, and just conversating, that is kind of a lost art, because sometimes people will say, well, you're not doing anything today, so you're not being productive. And looking at it through the lens of a student, like, if you were productive 100% of 180 plus days a year, it's no wonder why students aren't coming to school anymore, right? Which is another thing that came out of the pandemic, is attendance rates, right, have skyrocketed on the unexcused or missing days, right? Now, part of that is because they built in, right, the mental health days and things like that. However, like, do certain kids need to be there all the time? And I think that was where my head started thinking when Ken was talking about his organization, where you're right, like, kids got testing this day and they can't make it, or they have a field trip, or they have like I don't know, a soccer tournament or whatever, they may, and then he only sees 1 or 2 times a month. But are there ways that we can make that work? Can we be flexible with the time? And it just baffles me because that's the only thing in our situation, not every situation, but in my situation, that they are so inflexible on is that time of time that you're in a school per day. And I do know, like, if teachers have a period off or something at the end of the day or something, and sometimes they leave, I've heard of stories where them getting reprimanded, and it's like, you're not trusting teachers, right? So, I mean, can we trust students? Can we, build these things in? I don't have the answer to that, but I'm just like, I just, it starts me thinking about very interesting ways we can do school differently for certain students where it fits, because we have students who they want that credential, they want a job, they want that carrot, they want that certification, they want something that is more than a maybe after school,
more than letters on a piece of paper.
right?
And percentages. You know, I I know you do work with portfolios with SpikeView and skills, and we've talked about durable skills and lifelong skills, 21st century skills, whatever you want to call them, but like things you can talk about with, what you know and are able to do, and then having something other than a diploma, a piece of paper that you can say, this is something I built, this is something I created, I think speaks to that lack of fluidity in learning, in the learning model, and the timestamps. And a lot of that, if you aren't, in public education, you might not know a lot of, like, those mandates come down from the very, very top, or from the state or federal level. But as a quick example, a lot of states and legislators have over time decided that quantity is more important than quality. And so schools used to start after Labor Day and end before Memorial Day. And the school days, I'm guessing, probably a little bit more flexible. I don't know at what point all of these bells and schedules came into place, as a way to organize, maybe systematize it. I'm not sure. But at some point it wasn't like that, right? It was a more organic learning experience. And it's like the pendulum is so orderly, ironed out, timely, and it's longer. The school year's longer, school days are long. They're trying to fit more into all of this. And at some point the system breaks down, right? You were seeing students are like, why do I need to be here all day, every day? Especially when you can like record the lesson, right? That's something the pandemic showed, like, oh, is this something that I can just like watch on my own time? Cool, it is. So then why do I need to be at school all day? I'm not going to be at school all day. And like, it showed like the gaps, right? That we don't need to be at school all day, every day. Or that learning doesn't need to happen in rows in a classroom, that like it can happen anywhere. There are models that we can do that. Some things do require us to be in person and to work on. And it's like, if you want students to be there, well, create experiences where they have to be present. And I think about Ken's work, and like, you can't solder if you're not in the shop.
Right.
I mean, unless you have that at home, but it's unlikely you'd have those tools at home. So yeah, this flexible learning models, flexible time models, you can't think outside the box if you're just going to keep everything in the box the same.
Right.
I mean, it's like all these softwares and all these and everything that supports schools. Well, it supports schools oftentimes with how they currently are. They're not being like innovative of like really jarring the system, which I know there are complications at every level.
Sure.
When you try and do that, but it that's why it's so rigid, because nobody wants to rattle it. It's like not a snow globe you want to shake up.
I mean, I'll be honest, like as a parent, what I would like to see more of is my son or daughter in a school situation. And if they had an opportunity, if they knew what they wanted to do or wanted to experiment with, um, and they can also earn money while they're during the school day. I know I've gotten pushback on this before, for kids selling things in school and things like that. And this isn't what I'm talking about, but I also think that should be an availability. There should be like a way where students can create and sell. Now, a lot of them will do it like with drop shipping or online regardless because it's 24/7. However, like, ways that they can earn, just not just doing mundane things, but I mean, if there's a shortage of teachers, there's a shortage of janitors and maintenance people. Why can't our students do those things with the trades and make money doing it, getting paid by the school? Why can't they? And I think this is where, you know, Ken said when businesses come in, they get frustrated because we can't do this and we can't do that, and then they just turn away and they're like, all right, well, whatever, we'll wait until 18. My goal in my last 10 to 15 years in education, I'll be honest, is to push that harder. Let's get louder there. Let's make some real life pieces for students, to where they can, number one, earn money. Because let's be honest, let's say, if we really want to talk equity, like let's go socioeconomics. You got a single parent at home, and they are working, a lot and trying to make ends meet. Well, what if my kid could be at school, and I'm talking high school and of whatever the legal ages are in your state, 14, 15, 16, um, and they can work while they're learning and getting credit for it and earn money for the family. Like how is that not more I mean, so for me, I think I'm very adamant about that. I've talked to a lot of students who are in difficult socioeconomic areas, and that's all. Many of those students that I've talked to in that area have told me, I want a skill, I want something that is going to make me money, because it's not just a necessity, it is actually an emergency in my situation. And I think that's something that, the trades definitely can do. I can see that with what Ken was doing. You have 100% job placement when he was there. I mean, come on. Like, I mean, I don't know what else we need to do. um Maybe our
We
listeners
need,
do.
maybe they do.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to duplicate some Kens.
Yeah, right. But I'm adamant about this, and I think it's something that I'm going to continue to work with. I know our school system. We're starting to look at. I was just reached out by administration, which I love, and they were asking, hey, we got this open house um, with our Chamber of Commerce, and we technically can't serve alcohol, so we're struggling to get people there. So I'm like, all right, fair enough, and it's true. So what can we do, right? And I'm like, let's go. Like, invite me to the meeting. Like, I'll do what. Like, I would love. And it's a build, right? It's not a big switch. But again, with Robert Peppo, like he's put his stakes out there and said, hey, what can these kids do? We need more people like that. And it's a gradual build. And it doesn't have to just be for business. It can be, chemistry, it could be math, it could be history. There's so much that we can do where we're working on projects and building in. And again, if we have to build in an inflexible 8-period day, then we do it, right? And then hopefully it gets bigger. But that's my little bright light that I've taken from Ken. I know I'm a little curt right now because I really am passionate about this. I want my kids to do this. I want my kids to be able to do this when they're in a school system somewhere,
And if you are listening to this and you're like, I have forged a bridge, made a path to
Mm-hmm.
create these types of systems, well, we definitely want to highlight that because I think sometimes it comes down to brass tacks of like, okay, well, how did you even get started? What was the program? Even if it was 5 kids the first year,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay to start something small and grow it. It doesn't need, of course, it would be great if we could just overhaul the system. Unrealistic. I mean,
Right.
one can dream, but it's this idea of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think Ken kind of gave us a couple bites though of
Definitely.
showing us a model that is working and is really getting at the trades and skill sets that could just they just benefit everyone. So amplifying those types of programs and stories and people is definitely the way to disrupt education and get other communities and parents and students who are excited about these learning models aware of them and able to make choices for their own education and their children's education moving forward. So I know I'm really excited to have learned about Ken's work and just all of the benefits that could come from bringing it's basically like bringing shot back and bringing like stuff that we at some point decided was not as relevant, or it was for quote unquote, this is very in quotes, the dumb kids, which is just ridiculous. But because I actually think it requires so much more skills to put together what's in your head and make it with your hands. Putting those two things together is incredibly difficult and skill based and worth building. So there's more than just mind work in education. And I think that's something that we really took away from Ken's episode and stuff that we want to discuss more as the podcast goes on this year and beyond.
I'm going to challenge everybody on the end of this is, if you can, and take a moment and go back and just listen to that conversation, listen to a couple of the other conversations that we have, but specifically Ken's, and think about it. If you're an educator, if you're a parent, what do you really, or even a student or administrator, what do you really want how can you take some of that information and change a small piece? Like, what is one connection that you can make with your community and give your kid a tangible skill? And then just start brainstorming, because that's what we're hoping. And that's how we disrupt education. So I think Ken laid out a lot there as well. So I think this is going to be an interesting pathway that we're taking here. We're going to start talking to some youth coming up. I'm very, very excited about that. Some right after high schoolers. And so just a little bit of a carrot out there for you. And we'll see if that lines up, those conversations line up to kind of what Ken is telling us works or not. I have an idea. You might find some very good carrots in there as well. So for Alli Privet, I am Peter Hostrasser. Thank you all for hanging out with us today on the Disrupt Education podcast. Check out our links down below. We'd love to connect, ask questions away. We do get emails from people. We do get connections on LinkedIn and everywhere. And we do our best to respond. So definitely love to build with you. So until next time, thanks again for hanging out with us on the Disrupt Education podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Disrupt Education podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Are you ready to disrupt the educational arena you're a part of? For more ways to get involved in the work we do here at Disrupt Education, check us out at disrupteducation.co or find us on LinkedIn at Peter Hostrasser or Alli Privet.
Our mission here is to help facilitate and amplify changes in the educational system through local initiatives and help you scale them into community movements. Our building network of disruptors in education are working to move beyond scores and grades as the only measure for student learning. If your school district, college, campus, or organization is looking for facilitators of this work, reach out on our website or social media.
And if you have any thoughts or feedback on this week's episode or any episode, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, taking risks, and most importantly, disrupting education.